Hello, I'm Rabbi Ep10 from the Great Synagogue in Sydney, and our personality today is Rabbi Hasdai Crescas, born in 1340 and died either in 1410 or 1411. Rabbi Crescas is a particularly interesting figure because his importance spanned many different areas. He was a very important leader of Spanish Jewry. He was a philosopher, and he was also a Talmudist and legalist. He was born in Barcelona to a family of merchants and remained very wealthy for his entire life. He was seen early on as a brilliant Talmudist, and that was encouraged and he was developed further. And he also interested himself in philosophy. His early works are primarily in the areas of Jewish law, but over a period of 15 years he wrote a book called Or Hashem, The Light of God. And this was an attempt to refute the Aristotelian philosophy of the Rambam of Maimonides. Aristotelianism was very powerful and dominant in the medieval period, both in Jewish and in non-Jewish areas, and certainly the Rambam was a very convinced Aristotelian, and his work, The Guide for the Perplexed, was an attempt to reconcile Aristotle and traditional Jewish thought. Rabbi Crescas took objection to Aristotle's thought and wrote a critique. He was intending to write a second book, critiquing the Rambam's approach to Jewish law and his Mishnah Torah. That book was never written. In fact, his works on Jewish law have largely been lost, and so he's recorded in posterity mostly as a philosopher. He was also an important leader of Spanish Jewry, and after the pogroms of 1391, when many Jews were forced to convert to Christianity, he wrote several polemical works against Christianity, trying to preserve Jews in their adherence to their ancestral faith. He also worked hard to bring Jews back into the fold who'd been forced to convert under the pressure of the attacks by the surrounding population. As a philosopher, he's not only interesting as an opponent of Aristotelian thought, he's also an innovator in the area of scientific method. Those people in the 16th and 17th centuries, especially in the Jewish community, who were involved in the scientific revolution, look back to Crescas and the way he tried to supplant and remove Aristotle's influence on science, which was thoroughly rejected in the Enlightenment period in Europe. His most interesting philosophical suggestion is that of determinism. There's a great debate going through all of philosophy about whether or not human beings have free will, or whether their behavior is somehow determined by external factors, or by the fact that God knows the future. And he came up with quite a radical philosophical position, that in fact God does know the future, and that therefore our actions are determined from the very beginning. How that is reconcilable by being commanded by God to behave in certain ways and not behave in other ways remains an outstanding problem, but nevertheless he pursued this line of determinism, which became very influential later on Baruch Spinoza, the great 17th century Jewish heretic and philosopher, who we'll discuss in a later item in this series. Rav Crescas is one of the most important figures of the 14th century, one of the great figures of Spain right at the end of its important period, and had more of his oeuvre been preserved, especially in the area of Jewish law, we'd have a wider appreciation of him and his role. Nevertheless, as a philosopher, he remains one of the most important philosophers in the Jewish tradition of the medieval period, and is now being studied more and more widely, both in Jewish and in wider circles. Thanks for joining.